In this video, I'm going to share all my best finger drumming techniques so you can better express yourself through rhythm and find the drummer within. As a result, you'll be able to play more realistic drum parts instead of always having to rely on drawing in MIDI notes. Hey yo, it's Alex from MIDI Music. I'm a musician, producer, and certified audio engineer here to help you level up your music, unlock your creativity, and make music your life. So let's go ahead and dive straight in. So number one is ergonomics and sample layout. Let's start here because at the end of the day, this is all about building muscle memory, just like playing any other instrument. I come from a background of playing drums before I got into finger drumming, which is why I lay out my pads like this. All right, so if you look at my push controller here, I have my pads laid out in a very specific way, which is a symmetrical layout. So if you notice right here down the middle, I have a mirror image of the same samples. So if I have my kick here, I also have it here. Snare over here, closed hi-hat, open hi-hat, high tom, low tom, ride cymbal, crash cymbal, mirror image. Now you might be asking yourself, why on earth do that? Because it emulates the natural movement of how a drummer alternates their hands on a drum kit. On a real drum kit, you have 4 limbs to play with, while with finger drumming, you have 10 fingers, both which have pros and cons. In general, on a drum kit, you'll be alternating hands when you're playing some sort of beat, fill, or patterns, and the goal is to emulate this kind of motion on push. All right, so just to give you a little visual of what I mean by alternating hands, I'm on this E kit, right? And if I play a groove, pretty simple, right? Right? Pretty simple, but once we start getting into more advanced patterns, we do a lot of alternating of our hands, right? Right? Etc., etc. So this left and right hand alternation is what we're trying to emulate with our finger drumming setup. Now on push, you can see how we can emulate some of the patterns and techniques we were doing on the kit. This will help us inject more realness and feel into our finger drumming. So for example, this opens up a ton of possibilities when we start using 2 hands on alternating patterns. For example, we can do hi-hat rolls. We can do open hi-hat rolls. We can roll on the snare. You can do the same with the kick or toms, whatever element you have. So you can do all sorts of cool rolls, which would be similar to alternating your hands on a drum kit. And you can also use the advantage of having 2 hands to throw in something like offbeats. So if I just hold down a straight up drum beat on my right hand, I can throw in offbeats and accents with my left hand. This is by no means how you have to do it. Feel free to do what works for you and experiment. That's half the fun. But to jog your thinking, here are some examples of other layouts that I've played. So I'm going to go through a few different examples of different layouts that I have on push to help jog your thinking and open up your imagination as to what's possible just simply with the ergonomic layout of the pads. So for example, here, very much similar layout than the one I just showed you. The only difference is I have claps up here, right? So now I can play drum beats just as I was before. But I can also play a snare up here and change the positioning of my hand to be like. So for example, it could be something like this. Let me move to another example. So with this percussive kit, I have very much the exact same layout here. Same symmetrical layout, but if I go up an octave to a different section of this drum kit, you can see that the pads are laid out differently. In this layout, all the orange pads are kicks, the teal ones are snares, and the yellow ones are hi-hats or some sort of cymbal. So as you can see, just changing the layout of the pads to a different formation will change the way that you play the pads, and it will also create different patterns. You'll find different ways of playing cool grooves, which is half the fun. So for example, just with a simple hi-hat, snare, kick in a row like this, we can move our fingers differently to come up with a different drum groove. Right? So we can just go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And then we can do the same thing with these pads. so on and so forth. Another quick example of what's possible is you don't only have to put drum sounds on these pads. So for example, in this drum kit, the bottom half is the same. I have 2 kicks, 2 snare kind of sounds, closed hi-hats, open hi-hats. But up here, I have different samples and bass notes that once I play them, they sound good together, right? So I could decide to just play the chords or just play the bass note or play them together in unison with this kit. And you can use it to create really cool parts that are not only drum parts, but parts of your entire song. So very simply, it could be something like this. We could do something really fun and do like accents. So on and so forth. Another example is using other percussive instruments and laying them out in a similar way. So right here, I have a tabla with low end tabla sounds as the kick, then hi-hat kind of sounds, kind of tabla, more of a snare type sound, right? And then I have a sitar up here with individual notes underneath. So again, you can come up with parts from the layout of a drum kit and play it all together. So on and so forth. So another type of layout on Push specifically is to be using a full 64 pad layout, which lets you create more ergonomic layouts for how your hand sits naturally. So as you can see here, we have our kicks in purple, which is where your thumb would lie. We have snares here. We have hi-hat type sounds, cymbal sounds, and then we have toms up here, down there in blue. And this creates like a whole different way of playing this, almost more like a hand drum. And by doing so, especially with your fingers, you can get some really cool rolls where you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, very quick. Right? And you can also do odd patterns where you're doing 3 with one hand and 2 with the other. And get really advanced patterns. Another thing about ergonomics that is worth keeping in mind is to hold your body in a specific way every time you play. Now, you could be standing up like I am or sitting down, doesn't matter. But in general, if you can approach playing the instrument the same way every time, you'll start to build that muscle memory. And ideally, when you're drumming, you want to hold your wrist straight, right? So if I bend my hand here, like I'm not in some weird contorted position as I'm playing, trying to be as natural as possible where my whole arm is straight. And then you want to let your fingers kind of just fall down and be natural when they're playing, as opposed to if you're bent backwards and there's tension, that will influence your ability to play, okay? And then again, for positioning, you don't want to be too close to your drum kit, like up here where you're squeezed in, or too far away where you're reaching, right? So just make it comfortable and try to approach it the same way every time. And finally, the most important part out of everything we talk about is practice. Don't forget to practice, 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 because again, the whole point is to embed what you're learning into your muscle memory, so then you can get into flow where you're not really thinking about it and your body knows what to do. And hey, if you want to learn how to design expressive kits just like the ones I showed you, this is actually my first stage of my 7-stage workflow to help you finish amazing sounding music from start to finish. So if you want the entire free course to help you finish a track in 10 days by using this method, check out the link in the description below to find out more. All right, let's move on to drum patterns 1 to 5, and they'll be mostly focused on the right hand. So let's start off with some more simple beats using one hand to start, okay? And in general, I kind of see the right hand as the groove maker, okay? It's usually the one that holds down the time. And then the left hand, we'll talk about it a little bit more, is a little bit more of the embellishments and or melodic elements if you have that in your drum kit or your drum rack in Ableton. So let's go ahead and start going through some drum patterns with a right hand to start getting a feel for holding down a groove. Okay. All right. So I've pre-recorded these patterns so then we can observe what's happening, and then I'll break them down and explain it to you and show you how to play it so then you can go ahead and practice it on your time or reinvent it or take what you want from it. Be creative, right? So let's check out the first beat. So very simple beat. All that's happening here is that we're counting down 4, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. So that's like the foundation of getting comfortable hitting quarter notes, hitting eighth notes, whatever in your hand. If you want to learn more about the foundations of building your rhythm, definitely check out this video up above where I go into the nitty-gritty of developing your rhythm. And once you understand a little bit more about rhythm, about downbeats, offbeats, etc., and how to break down drum groove or whatever it may be, then you're in great position to go forward from here. Okay. So this drum beat is pretty simple. We're going to keep it simple to get started. All that we're doing here is accenting the 1 of a 4 count with the kick, and then we're changing to accenting it with the snare. So let me show you what this looks like. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty simple. Once you got that feel down, then you can feel free to speed it up. All right, let's move on to pattern number 2. Okay, so this is again very simple. We're just getting warmed up here, right? So with this pattern, pretty simple. We kind of have 2 halves to it. We're starting off with, right? That's the whole pattern. So the first half of that is just, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have the kick on the 1 and the 4, and then the snare on the 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? And then the second half is, so then we have the kick on the 1 and the 3, and then the snare on the 4. Cool. Let's move on to the next pattern. So quick, this pattern looks like this. Cool. So what's happening here is we're starting off with the kick and the open hi-hat, right? Then we're proceeding to continue hitting the closed hi-hat. So, right? So kick on the 1, 2, 3, 4, kick on the 1 and 4, and the snare on the 3. So that's the first half of the pattern. Then we continue. Okay. So the second half, right? Kick on the 1 and 3 again, and then the snare on 4. And then these are kind of eighth notes, 1, 2, right? And so there's an offbeat happening there, right? Okay, so that's where we start introducing this left hand to accent some of the offbeats, right? Which can make it feel really fun. So if you can get that under your hands, you'll start to know what I mean, where you're kind of injecting the left hand for that offbeat feel. Let's move on to the next pattern. So for this pattern, we're kind of using a different hand formation, a different way of playing. And if you follow along, you'll see how it feels different, right? But what we're doing here is we're hitting the kick with the thumb, and then the hi-hat with the index, and then the snare or the clap or whatever you use as a snare sound up here with your ring finger, right? All right, so the pattern looks like this. It's a really fun one to play once you got down. All right, so to break this down and play it real slow, what we're starting is, okay, so we're starting on the kick and then hi-hat kick again, okay? And then we do a pattern of, right, snare, hi-hat, kick. So those are two kind of motions, right? So I would practice that. I have that pause in between, and then, right? So then once you got that down, you can continue, right? We add that again at the end. And then finally, then we do the same pattern once again. So let's move on to the next pattern. So let me play through this pattern a little bit slowly so that you can see what's happening, and then we'll break it down. So it looks like this. Okay, so what's happening here is we're starting off just with the kick, and then we're kind of doing a left-right with the hi-hat. And then we're landing on the snare. Right, so I would get that movement down first. Right, and then we're going right-left with the hi-hat after that. Okay, so getting that movement down. Then you're ready to continue. Then we're going with a kind of shot back and forth, right, left, right with the hi-hat and the kick. So we're going. Okay, so then you continue. And then you do left, right, left, and then landing on the kick on the last beat, right? So. And then it restarts. Cool. Let's move on to the next pattern. All right, so slow. This is what this pattern looks like. Okay, so what's happening here is essentially we're starting off with the kick, and then we're doing this roll kind of thing where we're doing 3 fingers on one pad. You could do 2 if you wanted, but 3 sounds cool as well. Okay, so we're going kick, 1, 2, 3, kick, 1, 2, 3. Then we're going back to the kick, up to the clap. All right, so the second half of this pattern, we're going kick, hi-hat again, and then kick, tom, clap, kick. Okay, so the first half of this pattern, right? Kick, kick, triple roll on the hi-hat, kick, clap. All right, so the second half are going slow. All right, so all together. All right, let's move on to the next pattern. Now, for these next 5 patterns, we're going to be looking at more intensive 2-hand techniques. Okay, so now we're going to get a little more advanced. And in general, the left hand, I kind of see it as what does the off beats or the harmonic elements in general. And you can kind of see it as the orchestrator, right? So your right hand is kind of what's holding down the groove and the beat. And then the left hand is kind of throwing in off beats and or hitting melodic or harmonic elements, okay? And a very easy way to get started with this type of thing is to have a drum kit that has some samples on it. Like this one, I have 4 bass sounds. Okay, going through this simple progression. And then on the top row, I have these different chords, right? So as we're playing a beat like the ones we've practiced in the right hand, we can simply hit either just the chord, just the bass, or both of these together, since I curated these samples to sound good together when we play them like this. Okay, so a very simple way to start is to just alternate between two sounds and start on the 1 count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so just simply playing samples in your left hand on the downbeat, like the 1 count, is a very simple way to get started with this. So for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So you can start to get the feeling that I'm describing here of the left hand being that orchestrator, right hand being more of the beat, right? And then once you're comfortable with that, you can start to just have some fun and start emphasizing other beats in your rhythm other than the downbeat. All right, so if we just play around with this layout and have some fun, it can sound something like this. All right, so once you got that down, you can start to play around and have more fun and emphasize other subdivisions in your beat other than the downbeat, right? So we can have some fun with it. It sounds something like this. All right, let's look at pattern number 6. And now we're going to start to incorporate more of the left hand and some alternating patterns. Okay, so let's check out this groove. All right, so the key with this type of beat is that we're going to keep the alternating motion between the right and left hand pretty steady, right? So instead of trying to play like really fast hi-hats on one hand, we're going to alternate between right and left, okay? So this is the first half of this pattern. Okay, again. So the key to this, again, is to keep alternating those hands. I'll play this really slow so you can start to see what is happening. So notice that on the first beat, hitting the kick and the hi-hat, and then we're hitting the next hi-hat with the left hand, and then the hi-hat by itself, right? And then we're landing with the hi-hat and the snare. Okay, so that's the first part of the pattern. Then we're going to continue to alternate the hands, but the left hand's going to move up to this open hi-hat for 2 hits. Then we're going to add the snare and then the kick with the left hand so that it emphasizes an offbeat. And then we kind of have the first half of this pattern, right? All right, so again, first half, very simple. And then the second half is again, all we're doing here is always alternating the hands. So the right and left hand are always hitting some sort of hi-hat. And then we're adding in the kick and the snare at the same time as the right or left hand to continue with those accents. full speed. All right, so the second half of this pattern is very similar to the first half. It's starting off the same way. Okay, but instead of hitting the hi-hat with the left hand, we're going to be hitting two different toms. Right, so we're going. Okay, and then for the second half. Okay. So we're going. And then we're leaving space there, right? So we're just hitting the open hi-hat and the snare at the same time and letting the rest of the count before we loop back around. All right, so all together. So all together, full speed. All right, let's take a look at the next pattern. All right, so this one, very similar, that we are always alternating our hands. That is the key to getting this kind of groove. All right, so the whole first half of this pattern is... Okay, so again, we're starting here, kick and hi-hat, left hand, right hand, snare and hi-hat. Okay, continuing. So once you got that, then you just roll out the rest of the bar with hi-hats. Okay, so that's the first half. Second half, very similar, same start. But we're going to hit the kick earlier. We're going to have a double kick there. Okay, and then continuing, we're going to hit the kick twice in a row like that. So to round off that pattern, we're just going to go. Okay, so all together. Cool, let's move on to pattern 8. Sounds like this. All right, so let me play it through real quick, then we'll break it down. So it looks something like this. Okay, so what's happening here is essentially we're starting off with the kick and the hi-hat, and then we're doing a hi-hat roll. All right, so I got to get those 16th note rolls under the fingers. Right? So, and then we're hitting the snare with the open hi-hat at the same time. Okay, and then we're continuing to alternate on the hi-hat, and then we're introducing a double kick pattern. So, okay. Okay, and then we're finishing off that bar with just the hi-hat rolls. Okay, so that's the first half of this pattern. And then the second half of this pattern is exactly the same, except we're kind of cutting it short and moving into a kind of fill. So it looks like this. Okay, so it's same beginning. Okay, and then we're going with the hi-hat roll into a snare roll a little bit earlier in the pattern. Okay, so get that down. Slow. Okay, and then from there, after the double snare, we're hitting the crash and the kick at the same time and alternating. Okay, so okay. All right, you can do this on the crash or the ride, whatever you want to do. All right, so all together with both halves of that drum beat together, the pattern looks like this. All right, moving on to the next pattern. Pattern number 9 looks like this. All right, so this pattern is a little bit different where we're kind of riding on the ride instead of the hi-hat. And we're going to be hitting the kick with our thumb instead of our middle finger here, right? So a little bit of a different hand positioning. But essentially how this beat starts is we're hitting the kick and the ride at the same time. And then we're going in kind of a pattern of 3. So we're going kick and ride at the same time, then 2 rides with 1 snare. Okay. So it's like ride and kick, and then 2 ride snare, 2 ride snare. Okay, so once you get that comfortable muscle memory wise. Okay, so that's the first half of this pattern. Then in the second half of this pattern, we're moving to the crash and hitting the crash and the kick at the same time. And we're just doing this kind of pattern. Okay, so basically we're just hitting the crash and the kick, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're throwing the snare on some offbeats. Right, so all together. Okay, so full speed. Moving on to the final pattern here, looks like this. All right, so this one's fun. This is more like a metal groove, metalcore groove, hard rock groove, whatever you want to call it. All right, so with this pattern, it's all based around practicing those fast rolls with 2 hands, right? So right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, very quickly. Right? And doing so with the kick pattern as well. All right, so the first half of this pattern looks like this. All right, so what's happening here is the beginning of this is basically alternating right and left with the kick and the open hi-hat. And then hitting the snare. Okay. All right, and then from there, we are continuing to alternate our hands, but we're leaving out the kick of the right hand, and we're just hitting the kick in the left hand, which creates like an offbeat syncopated kick feel, right? So. All right, so what is happening here is that, again, we're alternating our hands, but only hitting the kick on the left hand. All right, so that's the first part of this pattern. And then the second half of this pattern is exactly the same, but we're just adding an extra snare hit on the end. Okay, so all together. So now we have some patterns under our hands and we're starting to build that muscle memory. Let me show you some fun techniques that you can use to sprinkle into your own beats, really make them your own. All right, so let's go back over here to the overhead. And yeah, let's start off with a very easy thing to do to add some more feel and have some fun with some fills in your drum beats. So what I want to talk about first is triplet feel. Okay, so far we've been kind of doing like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, like a normal count. With a triplet count, instead of counting one beat for each beat, we can split it up into 3, right? So instead of being 1, 2, 3, 4, we could go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, where we're counting 3 times for every beat. Okay, and this triplet pattern is very ergonomic when it comes to alternating our hands. Because if you're thinking triplets and you're alternating your hands, you can emphasize each beginning of a triplet with a different hand. So let me show you what I mean. So if I start on the open hi-hat with the 3 count, 1, 2, 3, and then start with my left hand first, 1, 2, 3, you'll notice that I'm accenting the beginning of each triplet with a different hand, right? So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Right? So when you're doing this kind of thing, you're emphasizing the beginning accent, you're accenting different notes, beginning with different hands, which has a specific feeling to it. So for example, on toms, you could do the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And notice how the beginning accent changes hands each time. So it's like right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand. Okay, and you can do this type of pattern on any drum. Okay, so what this allows you to do is, let's say we're playing just a normal drum beat in 4. So a couple of cool ways to use this is you can throw in a triplet pattern at the end of your drum beats for some cool fills, or you could play in a kind of 6/8 or 3/4 feel using this triplet, right? So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? So you can make a beat from that vibe. Emphasizing that 3 pattern, or you could throw it in with a drum beat. Next thing I want to highlight is an offbeat emphasis or syncopation, right? So if again, we look at our right hand, we just do a simple drum beat. If we're just keeping the motion in our right hand, all of our snare placements and kick placements will be on a downbeat or our count of 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. No matter where I put the kick and snare, if it's lining up with my hi-hat hitting those quarter notes, it's going to hit a downbeat. Now, this is where the left hand can really come in handy, where you can really hold down just a 4 count quarter notes in your right hand and emphasize off beats with your left hand alternating, right? Right? So you can get that syncopated feel, and this gets super fun once you start throwing it in the mix of a normal drum beat on your right hand. Right? So you can really start to feel the offbeat emphasis by virtue of your left hand. Finally, I come from a rock and roll background, so this is very rock and roll, but you can use crash cymbals or ride cymbals or whatever it may be to really emphasize beats, right? So for example, if I'm just throwing in a normal drum beat, I can emphasize parts of the groove by hitting the crash at the end of a phrase and or hitting it with a kick or something to really emphasize a specific beat in the pattern, right? There's also a lot of creative things you can do in how you play the pad. So a really fun one is like finger rolls. So for example, on a single pad, I got this tabla kit. Instead of just hitting one finger on a pad all the time, you can hit 2 fingers on a pad. Right? You can do these flams where you're kind of hitting 2 notes really close at the same time. And you can even go as far as to do 3, like we did in that drum pattern. And get it in both hands. And then with all these techniques kind of combined and starting to get the muscle memory in there, you can start to really create unique beats. So for example, you could do the whole triplet thing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then maybe you throw in one of those triple shots on a single pad, which will change the pattern. Right, and then at a certain point, you can just get your fingers run wild and see what happens. And hey, if you want to learn how to build your own custom drum racks like the multiple different drum racks that I showed you in this video, I highly encourage that you watch this video next, where I go super deep down the rabbit hole to make sure that you can design your own epic drum racks. So when you're ready, I'll see you in that video.